for all the latest community news and events.
103.2 Preston FM.
Your community, your radio.
Now, my second guest of the morning has made some statements in 2013, like in July. This week, for the first time, I got an insight into what it's like to be an adulteress, was a statement in July. In September, I love to eat and hate exercising. And in September, Ted Robbins and his 1-inch instrument. And way back in January 2013, husband celebrates New Year with his stubborn wife. And some of the stories that my next guest has written during 2013. And it's Aasma Day, Lancashire Evening Post health correspondent. And we'll also be talking about the fact that Aasma's won quite a prestigious award in November of 2013. So a very good morning to you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you. So, life as a journalist. I mean, we start with probably the question you probably get asked most. Why did you become a journalist?
As far back as I can remember, I think it's something I always fancied. I always fancied writing and making a living through writing. And it started off from wanting to write children's books to, actually, I think I'd like to be a journalist. I think it's just the fact that there's so much variety, you get to meet so many different people, and you get to write.
And did this start through school? I mean, was it something that you were interested in doing when you were at school? Were you involved kind of with the school newspaper or the rag magazine, etc.?
Yeah, at school I always enjoyed English, so I always enjoyed writing. And it was probably when I went to secondary school, there wasn't a school newspaper or magazine, so myself and a few friends set one up. And then it was just a case of going to university and following my dream of becoming a journalist.
Right. And knowing what you know now in the role as a journalist, would you do the same thing all over again?
Definitely, I would. I wouldn't change it.
What is it about the job that you really enjoy?
Getting to meet so many fascinating people, I think, and the fact that every day is different. There's a huge amount of variety, and you do get the chance to do things and see things that you wouldn't get to do in other jobs.
And are you kind of in charge of the stories that you cover? Are you able to cover the stories that you find of interest?
There's a lot of flexibility and working on your own steam, being self-motivated. So yeah, all the journalists at the Lancashire Evening Post come up with their own ideas every day on a daily basis. There could be sometimes they're told to go to court or they're told to cover something in particular, go to a specific council meeting, but a lot of it's all about coming up with ideas and creativity yourself.
And as a journalist, I mean, have you ever had to make that kind of moral decision in covering a story that you've not wanted to cover?
Not as such. I think being a journalist for a local newspaper where you're serving your community, you're always conscious of doing things which are morally right and making sure you don't upset people and that you cover the story in a fair way. So I don't think I've ever done a story which I felt uneasy about. Sometimes it can be a tough subject, but I think as long as you treat it fairly and give it a balanced view, and if you're dealing with a sensitive issue, deal with it sensitively. I think what's important to remember when you're serving your local communities, these are readers who you want to speak to time and time again, and you don't want to it's not like national newspapers where...
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, where they could do a story and if they upset people it doesn't really matter because one might never have to speak to them again, but we speak to the same people time and time again and we have to build that relationship and that trust.
Yeah, I mean that is a very interesting point, isn't it, in comparison maybe to a journalist on a national newspaper, because often journalists on national newspapers do come in for a lot of criticism from members of the public. I mean, how do you rate journalism in this country?
I think it's very important, journalism in this country, and I think obviously the journalists on the nationals do a great job. but probably what's different is the relationship they'd have with the community and with the people they're dealing with. They probably don't have to build up that same level of trust, because might not have to speak to the same people again. They're dealing with people all over the country, so they might not have to speak to one particular councillor every week and make sure that he trusts them enough to tell them things, because they would do it differently. But I think they do a great job, as do local journalists. But I think it is very different.
And what would be your ideal dream story in the future? What would be the kind of story, if it landed on your desk tomorrow morning, you think, wow? I mean, we'll talk about the award, but in the future, if something landed on your desk that you'd think, wow, this is my dream story, this is what I want to cover.
I think what's interesting about the job is that you don't know what's going to come in, and I think there isn't ever an aspiration for a dream story to come in, because when it comes in, that's when you realise what it is. And it's more, I think for me, it's more finding something purely by chance or through your own work, or rather than something landing on your desk. I think it's about, chatting to people, and somebody might say something, you think, wow, that's an amazing story. And I mean, one of the examples was the Twilight investigation that I did earlier this year. That I did earlier this year. I mean, just chatting to somebody at a homeless shelter, he told me he'd not bought any food for 5 years because he'd found everything he needed in supermarket dustbins. And that was such a fascinating story. But what made it so great for me was the fact that it was a pure chance conversation. It wasn't somebody who came and said, here you go, here's a story, this is a great story. Or it wasn't a telephone call that came in on my desk. It was going out there, meeting people and finding the story. So I think that's probably more exciting for me than anything else.
And when you're writing a story, I mean, do you sometimes personalise it, or do you try to make certain that doesn't come across when you're writing that story? Your own personal views, feelings, political persuasion. Are you very careful that the story that you're writing doesn't actually summarise you personally?
Yeah, we're reporting the story, so it's not really about your own views at all. So when I'm writing a story, it's about the person I'm writing about. So my views don't come into that. I mean, where your views can come in is when you're writing reviews, and I do a weekly column. So obviously something like that, you can put your own views in, and that's totally different. But daily stories and features, no, it's about reporting the facts and the person's story in their words.
And although we have been talking about kind of local journalism and compared in a way to national journalism, I mean, this could happen. I don't know if it has happened to you, but how far would you go to protect the source of your story if it was on the line that you were being asked that you had to tell where you got that story from? How far would you go to protect that source?
Well, journalists do have the protection that they can protect their sources, and even if you got asked to go to court, you can protect your source. So I think we always, if somebody tells us something in confidence, we always honour that. We don't. Obviously, there is obviously a point, and it could depend on what the story is, if whether it's dangerous to somebody else. But thankfully, I've never come across that sort of situation myself. But if somebody trusts you enough to tell you something and says that you've got to protect me and I don't want my name coming into it, we always honour that.
And often the public will often say that journalists twist the stories that they write. I mean, how do you cope or deal with that if you should ever be accused of it?
I think we absolutely don't do twist, but we only report on what we're told. Sometimes people might not like the angle we take, but for us it's the most important angle of an interview. And sometimes if somebody doesn't come across very well, and that can happen in, say, court cases, they might not be happy about the fact, but it's actual the facts. And we take all our interviews down in shorthand, we keep our notebooks, so it's all there, nothing's made up, nothing's twisted, or it's all legit.
And in the world of media, I mean, everyone in the world of media these days, particularly local newspapers, because there is so much media out there, there's so much news. How important do you think it is that we do maintain local newspapers?
I think local newspapers are very important. I think if it wasn't for local journalism, national journalism, there's a lot of things that people will be able to get away with. There's a lot of things that won't be uncovered. And I think it would be a very, very sad day if they weren't able to be maintained. But I think they will be, because I think people always want to know what's going on, and I think it's important to shed a light on things that would otherwise go buried under the carpet, as it were. I think things like, say, the expenses scandals, which wouldn't come out if it wasn't for journalists actually doing the digging and finding out about these things. I think there's a risk that the public could live in a very different world.
And the world of politicians and the scandal there, I think it's just as important that we're aware of what's happening locally here in Preston and South Ribble, isn't it, when it comes to journalism?
Yeah. Well, that's where it all starts, and I think people want to know what's happening in the place they live, and that's what's so important for all the journalists at the Lancashire Evening Post to do. It's to highlight all aspects, whether it's the happy stories, the crime, maybe things, plans for new buildings or new developments. But it's everything. People want to know what's happening near their street and in the city where they live.
And the brilliant Twilight series, how did that come around? How did it begin?
It was an idea my bosses had, which was they wanted to do an investigation, and they wanted to give the time to do it. So they basically just said to me, right, we don't want to see you in the office for the next few weeks. Go out there and just find the stories. It's just find the hidden world on our doorstep. So it was very open, and it was just a case of what I found. So it was very much about going out at night, talking to the homeless, going to soup kitchens, spending time at the Salvation Army, just a mixture of things, and speaking to people out there and just hearing their real stories. Were
you surprised by what you found?
Oh, definitely. I think people don't realise what's going on under their own nose. You can be nice and comfortable in your house and not realise how somebody a few streets down is living. And I think it was quite eye-opening. I think it was things that people think maybe happen in grittier cities. Maybe people think it's things that happen in the streets of London or the streets of Manchester, but this is Preston, and there are people who, I mean, one of the stories I did was a nursing assistant who was forced to go into prostitution because she didn't have enough money. Another story of somebody who had his finger chopped off by a loan shark because he couldn't pay his debt, and this is all things that are happening on our doorstep. So I think it was a real eye-opener. Yeah,
because we often think that it happens elsewhere, don't we?
We do.
To other people.
Yeah, I think everyone thinks, oh, that's something you hear about on the news or something you read about in a national newspaper, but it wouldn't happen here. But I think the frightening thing was we found it does happen here, and this was just a snapshot of what was discovered over a few weeks. So there's probably a lot more stories like that of how people live.
And during that period, did you think that maybe agencies and councils and other organisations are letting these people down?
I think our aim with the series was to highlight that this is happening, but we also did try to signpost people to the agencies that can help. We highlighted the work of the agencies out there, the unsung heroes such as the Salvation Army, and how hard they work to support these people. And every day we made sure we printed alongside the story, we printed a panel with helpline numbers and websites so that anybody in a similar situation could be directed to somebody who could help them.
And during that period of time when you were doing it, did you ever feel fearful in a way, in what you were covering, or the depth of it maybe?
Obviously there are lots of the things I did included things like going out late at night in the city centre, which can be frightening, but I did feel in safe hands because I went out with the street pastors and they made sure I had a personal alarm and said we had to stay with them. And when I went to homeless shelters, there's always somebody, a contact, whether it was a vicar or whoever who was with me. But I didn't feel frightened because these were just ordinary people. They weren't frightening people. They weren't people who, criminals are going to hurt you or anything like that. I think that was the perception we're trying to change. They were ordinary people who've just fallen on hard times. And I think I found it very humbling because some of the people, even though they had nothing themselves, were so happy to give their time and talk to you and try and share what little they had. One particular thing that stood out was when I went out at night talking to the homeless on the streets, one gentleman shook my hand, and when he found out how cold my hands were, he offered to give me his gloves.
Wow.
And that's all he had. And I thought, wow, this people have got so much, and he's got so little, and he's willing to give me his gloves. So yeah, it was very humbling.
Any plans for follow-up or to revisit?
The Twilight?
Yes.
Well, I think because it went so well, our editor does actually want, our editors do actually want all our reporters to do similar series, not on Twilight, but different investigations, because I think it's very important to invest the time looking at what's going on, and I think there's so many different areas and issues that can be explored in greater detail. Since Twilight, we've already done a couple like that, different series. So I think the plan is to keep doing them and make sure that people do get the chance to look at different themes and topics.
And during the period you doing Twilight, how difficult or easy was it then to actually commit to paper what you were actually experiencing on the streets?
I think my main priority at first was to find the stories. So very much the first couple of weeks was going out there, finding the stories, meeting people, introducing myself, and then just spending time with them, gaining their trust. And then once I had the stories, it's sort of managing your own thing. It's a balance between going out and finding more stories, or do you write up what you've got so far? So I just juggled it, and once I had enough, I thought, right, now I need to spend time crafting it all together and putting it all into features and sorting out how we're going to run it over the course of the 2 weeks, which are the best stories, what order we're going to run them in. But yeah, there was so much there.
So. And when did you then first hear that it was going to go forward for a possible award?
It was the O2 Media Awards, which are run annually, and all staff are encouraged to enter them. And what you have to do is you put your best 6 stories in and enter them, and then you don't really give it another thought. You forget about it. And I think I just put my portfolio in, and then it was a real surprise when I heard I'd been shortlisted. And to be honest, I was honoured enough to be shortlisted. I didn't really expect to win at all, so that was a real surprise on the night. Yeah,
it must have been a lovely feeling, though, knowing that, you had been recognised for the work that you had put into the series. Yeah, it was lovely. It's nice to be recognised for something that you've enjoyed doing and you've worked hard on. So yeah, I think I was just chuffed enough to have been shortlisted, and I went along to the awards night thinking somebody else is going to win, but I'm just glad I've been shortlisted. I just didn't really expect them to say my name, so it was a real lovely surprise. So is it difficult afterwards, and congratulations on the award, because I did follow the Twilight in the paper, I did read it all. Congratulations on that. How difficult then is it to go back maybe to the mundane day-to-day work after, in-depth journalism as you did in that series? I think I'm quite lucky really, because I don't really have to. I mean, there's always bits of your job which are more the regular things that you do, but I think there's always in-depth stuff to do. There's always something exciting to do. So I think there's never a boring week really. Right. You're always doing something. There's always a story. I mean, the story which we ran on Monday, which I wrote and found the lady to interview, was a very inspiring lady who had half her face eaten by her pet dog. Yes, I know that. And I mean, that story's been picked up by all the nationals and magazines, and she's appearing on television. But we broke that story, and it's nice feeling to know that. And
I think that just shows that something like that can just come in any week. And so no, it's definitely not been boring since Twilight. It's there's been lots of great stories since then to do. So it keeps your interest, and every day you're fascinated.
Yeah, and never know what's around the corner.
You don't, not at all.
Like appearing on Preston FM.
That was something I totally couldn't have predicted.
It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you, and can I thank you for coming in this morning? It's been a pleasure, and hope I shall be following the stories as they appear in the paper.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.
On 103.2 FM.
From Leyland to Longridge.
And Wood Plumpton to Walton Ledale.
It's your community.
Your radio.
Your Preston FM.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed today's interview, why not tweet Huey at ChatCityPFM.